And again, I asked Rod for a bio, and here we go. On with the glasses, Rod, and this is what you told us. Rod is a husband, dad, granddad, minister of the Uniting Church, currently based in Blackburn. He has a restless passion for church and the way of life shown in Jesus of Nazareth. Reflecting on nearly 30 years of ministry and just over 60 years of life, Rod is aware of many changes in his experience and the practice of life and faith. Is he religious? Probably, but it sometimes depends on who's asking, why, and in what context. Well, Rod, here we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorna. Hi, everyone. I've really enjoyed thinking about this topic today, and in preparation for what I'm about to share with you. So I'm actually really appreciative of the invitation. I'm a bit like Robert, that I'm going to read some of what I've prepared because that helps me stay on track. When I was asked about this topic, this question, first thought that immediately hit me was, well, am I religious? Thus the bit in my profile. And then secondly was, have I changed my mind? What if I have? From what to what, or what's gone on there? I've never been able to say or to join in when others have said, I'm not particularly religious, but I'm spiritual. That's never quite fitted for me because I've never really understood what it meant. And it gets overlaid in many situations with what a friend of mine calls a bit woo-woo. It's a bit esoteric and airy-fairy even. So where I came to was a series of questions to start with. What do I think religion is? Is that different from what everyone else thinks it is? And how do I relate to it? And I share some of this with you because it's actually been really important for me in my thinking and preparation for today. Funnily enough, if you go online and you look up religion, you get some definitions. Things like, quote, from the Oxford Dictionary, belief in and worship of a superhuman power or powers, especially a god or gods. Didn't really fit me. Or a particular system of faith and worship. Yeah. Or a pursuit of interest followed with great devotion is another one there. And then I looked at Britannica online, and it said this, which rang some bells with me. Human beings' relation to that which they regard as holy, sacred, absolute, spiritual, divine, or worthy of special reverence. Now, I wasn't completely sure about the absolute, but the rest of it rings quite a lot of bells for me. Particularly more than the one about the superhuman power, because that's one area of my life and faith that I'm very clear has changed. I no longer experience or relate to God as a being or even a super being. The old man with a beard sitting on a cloud. I don't sit on a cloud, but the beard's growing greyer. That ceased meaning for me many years ago. And I'm much more likely now to use expressions like holy presence or sacred mystery or life in all life. Or a couple of other favourites for me, or meaningful ones for me, is the words of Paul in Acts chapter 17, of the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Or the affirmation of another Paul, Tillich, who said that God is not a being, but is the ground of all being. In the bio, I mentioned context. Context is really important to me. And my context is, as Lorna said, I'm a minister within a church congregation, a local community, and that continues to be very important for me. So saying things like I don't believe in a being, as you might imagine, can occasionally get a bit tricky, particularly when I, as the minister, lead public prayer. It can be tricky holding to my own sense of God while treading carefully among quite different understandings of the people with whom I'm joined in prayer on Sundays. And that's been a challenge for much of my ministry. I remember 25 plus years ago now, being in a small rural parish in South Australia. And I was asked by those at one end of the parish to pray for rain. And I was asked to pray by the people at the other end that the rain would stop. And I can't exactly remember what I did, but I know that even then I didn't share the sense of an interventionist God who stopped and started rain. So I probably disappointed both sides. As I said, that's been a challenge, which has been really important for me. So what have I done about some of those things? One thing that I've noticed that I have done over the last 15 years or so is to claim for myself and the churches in which I work the biblical practice of speaking symbolically about the divine. And what I mean by that is whenever I use the letters G, O and D in that order, I use capitals to remind myself and others that we're not naming a being. We're actually using a symbol for something unnameable. For me, it's a sacred presence. Others use different language. And I like that. It is very meaningful for me. And each time I explain it to people, I find a response that says, yeah, I get that. That makes sense. And of course, it is a practice of the ancients who used symbols such as Yahweh or the Lord or even I am to describe their experience of the holy. The other thing that has been really important to me as a change is that the embrace of holy mystery has become something that has grown with me as I've grown older. So I reflected on these things in preparation for today, and it occurs to me that they've grown in me because I've been part of a community and communities within that have nurtured that growth and encouraged me to talk about and practice them. And for me, sitting now, I think that's what religion is. And I think it's because of that that I actually continue to identify as religious. Not in the tribal sense of, I am a Christian, that is my religion and it's right and you're wrong and all of that sort of stuff. And not in the sense of a defining doctrine by which we measure who is in and who's out and who's acceptable to God and all of that. This next bit's a bit flippant. Not in the sense of the Queen of Hearts telling Alice in Wonderland that she believes 6 impossible things before breakfast. I'm religious in the sense of a community of fellow travellers doing our best to work out this thing called life together and what we do about it, and continuing to find holiness in that. So when I talk about what has changed in my understanding or of how I've changed my mind, that's a very key thing. I now think much more of the community of fellow travellers, the community of inquirers, the community of frail people doing their best to support each other. If I may, there's a couple of things, specifics within that in which I have changed my mind and my practices, because I sort of got to that point and remembered that it's meant to be about how we live. I believe we need to take the Bible seriously, not literally. And that is something that I think I have changed over many years. And among other things, one of the practices for that has been talking in church and elsewhere about the stories and the teachings that trouble us, and even the ones that we've found ourselves needing to abandon, including things like talking on a Good Friday, in a Good Friday service, about how I can no longer find safety or credibility in statements like, "He died for my sins." I found others for whom that was very liberating. Taking the Bible seriously calls me to take the sacred teachings of other religions and other forms, other sources of wisdom seriously, not to sort of grade them as better or less important than my own. And if I ever believed that those who followed other paths might go to hell, it's a long time since I did so. In fact, I'm no longer afraid of a place waiting for me after my death if I don't ask Jesus into my heart or call him my personal Lord and Saviour. One of the most profound experiences of my life was holding our firstborn child in my arms for the first minutes of his life, yelling his head off as it happened. In that moment, I was drawn into the sense of holiness in a way that I don't think I have been before or since. Not in the sense of intelligent design, but as I held him, and I find myself doing this as I tell the story, I was drawn physically and emotionally and spiritually into an experience of transcendence that I still struggle to put words to, even 32 years later. What I like is that I no longer feel I need to put words to it. I just need to let it be. That same experience put me on the path of dismissing original sin as strange and dangerous, and being surprised that I ever thought it made sense. It's led me down the path of abandoning most of the classical atonement doctrines as well, and I think I've found myself healthier for it. One of the most dramatic, I think, as someone who remains a minister in church, is that I have changed my mind and my practices around the area of human sexuality. And that was a long journey for me, beginning with my friendship with a gay man who was very, very kind to Catherine and I, who was afraid to share his sexuality with members of his church in case they would abandon him or reject him. And I think he was right. And that's a journey that has had many turns, including a moment that I'm very proud of, and that's being part of the Uniting Church Assembly meeting that gave our ministers permission to conduct same-gender marriages, which I've since done. As I went to that meeting, I thought I was in favour of the proposal on the basis of justice. But while there, I realised it was on the basis of following the way of Jesus of Nazareth as best I could. It became a religious conviction. And finally, my practice in church these days is to include a contemporary reading of grace alongside a reading from the Bible, believing that however we understand it and live it, and however it influences us and shapes our actions, sacred thinking and experience didn't stop with the closing of the canon, and it's not limited to the Bible. That's been something that again, I can chart as a bit of a progression in my life. So I guess in summary, what has changed for me most is my sense of what religion is, and also my sense of the community, that how the community of religion, including its tricky scriptures, remains important to me in the midst of all that has changed.